In this video, I want to give you the top 3 reasons you should care about this flipped classroom concept and teaching with more video technology elements. Reason number 1, time is precious. There is not unbounded time with students. And that's true whether you're a college instructor like me, whether you're a high school instructor, all the way down to the littler kids. There is not infinite amounts of time. In fact, you could tabulate how many minutes or hours you have with students, and that might seem like a big number, but it goes very fast. And so one of the reasons you should care about the flipped classroom model is that it gives you time. Let me give you some examples. In my 1-hour class, it is common for me to spend 5 to 9 minutes talking about the homework that was assigned last. Maybe I'm giving grading notes, maybe I'm telling people what I'm seeing, or maybe I'm just making comments connecting and finishing the subject. Well, that's 5 or 9 minutes lost every time we get together. What if that same conversation, just explaining what I saw in the paper, I moved it outside of classroom? And you might be saying, well, Jordan, if I send that in an email, people aren't going to really read it. And I would say, you are right, they won't. But if you put it in a video, or maybe if you make it in an interactive video, might want to watch my video on that, you can not only explain these things, but really test and measure if students understood your comments. Because I like to move those grading notes into a weekly review video that just covers things I'm seeing in their papers, not only looking back on the stuff they've already done, but also talking about their next homework assignment. You see, if I don't talk about assignments at all in my class time, I have gotten 5 to 9 minutes back for assignments that they've already done, and at least 5 minutes for assignments they're about to do, which means I'm extending my class time. Time is precious. Okay, the second reason you should care about this flipped classroom model is what I'm calling informed engagement. Now, informed engagement is what I loved about my master's level classes, or even some of just my higher level bachelor's classes, which is where students would argue and they would care about the subject, and they cared maybe because it connected to passions or because it was a subject like in the Bible, but it also might be because they were informed. They had already read the materials, they had seen some lectures, and they came together to really collaborate on this topic. These magical class sessions, I think, can happen a lot more often if some of the teaching time is moved outside of the classroom time. For example, you might already assign homework to read this, watch this, and whatnot, and so students are getting access to content. But if in addition to reading from a book or a textbook, let's say, they're also seeing you highlighting parts of the book in a content video plus the reading, when they come to class, they not only have the original content piece, maybe a reading from a chapter, but they also have your teachings on it, and they come to class. And here's the real gold moment. You know what it's like when you start a new subject and you start talking to the class right away about it. Who usually responds? The fast responders, those students who can only need 5 seconds to think about something and they have an answer. So you suggest a new topic or a new segue, they're on board, but most of the class is not on board because they have not had time to slow down and think. One of the reasons you should care about the flipped classroom model is not just because it saves time, it does, and it lengthens class, but also it creates informed discussion because you're moving some of the teaching space out to videos and interactive points in video so that students, when they show up, they've consumed more and they're ready to discuss, but you've also made sure that you are not teaching something new and then asking questions or assigning an assignment or going for a discussion or some sort of engagement piece. You're doing some of that outside of class so people who are slow processors have time to really chew it, and by the time they show up to class, whether that's in Zoom or in person, they will have more informed opinions, and that creates for a much more interesting and engaging class. And the last reason number 3 why you should care about this flipped classroom concept is what we do when we're together. Now, that's kind of a strange aside here, but to me, this is the one I'm most passionate about. And maybe it's part of the church angle, maybe it's part of my educational angle, but you just have to step back and say, where have we been? You know, if we just stepped back 400 years ago, churches and educational institutions probably looked the same. People came together who generally knew each other from smaller rural areas, smaller societies, or just even tighter knit social groups in the city. They would come together either at church or they'd come together in the school and they would learn something from an expert. And they couldn't learn this elsewhere. They needed to come to the expert, and so they showed up and the expert taught, and their job was to absorb it, to memorize it, and to keep the teachings of the expert and be able to reproduce them in some other way. Well, guess what? A lot has changed, and we can do a lot of things on our own right now. Not only can you educate yourself through videos, through books, or through online lectures that you give to your students, they can self-educate at home. And that creates this whole new possibility that did not exist a few hundred years ago, and that's us coming together already informed. And when we come together as informed people, we can do something different together. People don't have to show up and listen and learn. They can show up and give and participate. That's tremendous. Let me slide back to the church angle. Remember just a few hundred years ago, people had to show up to listen to a sermon because they had no access elsewhere to that kind of learning and insight. Even 100 years ago, you'd have to be reading books. And what kind of person would read those books? Well, people who wanted to be theology teachers or pastors, of course. But now, with the advent of the internet and with all the YouTube videos and all the materials, I don't need to go to a church building to get teaching. I can get that at home. Now, hear me right. I'm not saying we don't need to go to church anymore. You can just do digital church. Actually, I feel passionately opposed to that. But I think that means that the one thing I can do by myself, which is absorb teaching, is the thing I should do before I go to church, so that when I come to church, I can do something that I cannot do at all, impossible by myself, which is engage in community in an emotionally connective, in-person way. I think that's what a lot of people have missed about COVID-19, is being in the presence of other believers, singing songs, and having chances to share authentically in some kind of group, right? Similarly, education. If we can absorb information outside of class and come to class, then what we do when we're together is so important. Because if these students can listen to you lecture at home, why should they do it in person? If they can watch your PowerPoint slideshow with you explaining it via Screencast-O-Matic at home, why would you use those minutes in classroom for it? You can do something different with more informed students ready to engage in the classroom. The 3 reasons you should care about this flipped classroom model is time is precious and it saves time when we're together. The second reason you should care is it creates more informed discussions, because it's not just about assigning a book, but moving the book and the lecture outside of class. You can now come together for reason 3. When we're together, we can do something we could not have done if I had to lecture and I had to explain assignments and I had to talk about the homework and I had to show the PowerPoints, like all those things. If we move that outside of class, when students show up, they show up informed. Everybody, thank you so much for watching this video, part of our series on rethinking class. I hope there's been some things that have been challenging and provocative. As usual, feel free to contact me, to disagree with me, to ask more questions, more dialogue, more suggestions, but let's be a learning community that's trying to engage topics thoughtfully. Thanks so much.